Assalamu alaikum viewers, I welcome you to our first program of the series Unfolding Truth. In this series, we're going to unfold many truths regarding to the Muslim issues. We all know that the Muslim world has been facing many challenges during the present history. One of those challenges is to revive Islam on the basis of tradition and values. But at the same time, it is a challenge to prove that our tradition is in harmony with the modern progress and development. There is a strong pressure to accommodate modernity in their societies, but not without the task to respond to the wave of westernization, which Muslims believe can destabilize their Islamic traditional societies. One of those issues is jihad and terrorism. At present, this issue is the most spoken issue in the whole world. We are going to discuss this issue critically and objectively in this program. I have with me two of the very astounding scholars of the Muslim world. On my right is Mr. Moiz Amjad, who is an Associate Fellow of the Al-Muarid Institute of Research. And he is also founder of one of the most visited websites of the world. Along with him is Mr. Asif Iftikhar, who is a lecturer at Lums University of Islamic Studies and Communication Skills. I'll start with Mr. Moiz. Moiz, you know that at present, as I said before, that the jihad and terrorism is a very, very common discussion in both the Western and Muslim world. Being a religious scholar, how do you differentiate jihad from the Western understanding of terrorism?
First of all, I'd like to tell you that Islam as a discipline does not define terrorism as such. Islam does give directives about what jihad is, and it would tell us some conditions which would be imposed on the action which we call jihad. But whatever would deviate from those conditions, whatever would not fulfill those conditions, would be incorrect action, but would not necessarily fall in the ambit of terrorism. So it is beyond the scope of Islam to define what terrorism is. But whatever jihad is in fact an international aggression against oppression. If a country, if a state, or if an organized legal rule has the power to counter any kind of oppression against any part of its community, an Islamic state would take action and stop the oppressive rulers from taking such actions. That precisely is what jihad is after the Prophet and his companion.
Asif, there is a long history of terrorism in different religions, ideologies, and philosophies. How do you see this ideology of terrorism, being associated with Islam in the present age? Do you find any historical aspect to this association?
Again, I'd tend to agree with what Moiz has said. Really, terrorism is a very, very subjective term, despite all the hype about it. I think even in the present times, the UN has still not been able to really come to one single definition. There are debates on it. What exactly is terrorism? For instance, I think probably Moiz will be able to expound more on this about the conditions that Islam has imposed, one being that it cannot be done without the authority of the collectivity of the Muslims. And in those terms, if at all individual groups or individuals themselves carrying out militant activism on their own without the authority of the respective states is something that the UN, for instance, or the world community or the international community would accept as terrorism, if that definition were taken, then one would really question the independence movement of the US itself. I mean, US got its independence as on the basis of a militant insurgency. So one man's terrorism would be another man's freedom fight. So really, the real question for the Muslims from a purely Islamic point of view is to see what is Islamic and what is not. Because again, to the Khawarij in the earliest times, during Ali radiallahu anhu's times, Maybe what they were doing was absolutely justified. They had their own rationale for it. Even Ali himself is reported to have said that these people are not non-Muslims. They have just deviated from the norms. They were fighting against the collectivity. Similarly, when the Nizari Ismailis began attacking the Seljuk Sultans and began a series of assassinations, which is a construct, by the way, which is that is really denied by modern day Nizari Ismailis like Farhad Daftari, for instance. But if it is accepted as the truth, then again maybe that was terrorism to the general Muslim community, but freedom fight for those people.
But in the present times, like if we are saying that terrorism is being committed under, as I said, various ideologies, but if it is committed by for any political element or social element from the Muslim world, why it is associated with Islam? Like in Ireland or in Spain, if the terrorism is committed, it is committed with those particular political or social organizations, whereas any kind of terrorism committed from the Muslim world is associated with Islam.
Yes, but then again the first question is, what really is terrorism in the first place? For instance, when US the freedom fighters who ultimately were also the founding fathers of the US Declaration of Independence were fighting the war, was that terrorism? Or was that a freedom fight?
Western intellectuals, they would argue that why when this question is asked to them, they said that for Muslims, for the sake of any movement, they take their argument from the Islamic sentiment of jihad. Do you agree with this argument?
Well, it's partly Islamic. A lot of it has to do with economics, with politics. I personally believe that a lot of theory has emerged from the praxis rather than the other way around.
Okay, can you explain what the praxis is?
For instance, in the Muslim world, when we see complete constructs of theory of jihad for the first time, or some remnants thereof, during the times of the 8th or 9th century scholars as Shaybani and Awza'i. And by that time, I mean, the Muslims had not really waited for Shaybani and Awza'i to give them this theory. I mean, the expansion had already taken place, militancy had already taken place, and these people were trying to give legitimacy, not necessarily for any wrong intentions. Maybe they were in all probability very, very sincere, but they were trying to invoke the Quran to adduce some evidence for the justification of what was already going on. So there are a lot of other factors which go into for instance, in present times, again referring to the US, the war against Iraq and against Saddam Hussein, to make it into a just war was given some kind of moral justification. But I very much doubt that only morality was the issue there. I mean, morality and moral justification for coming out with the laws of war in this instance.
War for peace.
War for peace, war for democracy, and so on and so forth. I mean, all these are justifications which we see emerging out of praxis rather than the other way around. Okay. So again, the same thing applies to the Muslim community.